Hey folks, this is Chad Perkins for Red Giant, here to get you up to speed with Trapcode Particular. Particular is a ubiquitous industry standard particle system as was used to make all of these incredible pieces. You know, the late great comedian Mitch Hedberg said that rice is great when you're really hungry and you want to eat 2,000 of something. Likewise, Particular is great for motion designers and visual effects artists that want to make hundreds or thousands of something. Particle systems generate particles. And then as the users, we don't have to control each individual particle. Instead, we control the system, and that controls the particles. It's almost like we're like a general over an army of little particle soldiers. So let's go ahead and start from scratch and apply Particular to a solid layer. I'm going to go to the Effect menu, go to the RG Trapcode submenu, and apply Particular. Now, the default settings don't seem too spectacular, but I'm going to show you how to change that. Now, we're going to go ahead and start in the designer. Just go ahead and click this big designer button in the Effect Controls panel to launch the designer. Now, whether you're new to Particular or an advanced user, I recommend starting in the designer. It's such a great tool. Essentially, what it does is it takes all of these text options in the Effect Controls panel and compartmentalizes them and makes them into these visual blocks where it's much easier to see and tweak these various settings. Also, it's a preset browser. So I'm going to go into the upper left-hand corner, and once my mouse gets over to this presets area, the presets categories pop out. Now, as I put my mouse back, it closes again. So if I want to lock that and keep that open, put my cursor back up here, click this arrow so it faces outwards, and now this stays there no matter where I put my mouse. So I can go here, let's say, for example, to explosive, and I could click on these presets to apply them. There's some awesome smoke. There's some really cool fire bursts and explosions and whatnot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close this up and go to Light and Magic, and I want to click this Ghost Trail one to show you something. Now, by default, this doesn't seem much like a trail at all. But if I click in this viewer, you can actually see that it's creating a trail. Now it's going a little slowly here. So what I'm going to do is go down to this little settings icon, and I'm going to change the acceleration from CPU to GPU and change the particle rendering from direct to streaming. Now, as this warning will tell you, this sometimes creates some weird funkiness. Things sometimes don't look perfect, but it's totally worth the trade-off, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now this renders much more quickly. Look at that. As we drag this around, we get a sense of what this system will look like if we animated its position. I should also point out that Particular is a 3D plugin. So if I click on, let's say, for example, floating streaks here, and we have some nice, 2D streaks, but alas, they are not 2D streaks, they are 3D. So if I click this little camera icon here until it's blue, then I click and drag around, you see that we actually can move these in 3D space. And that becomes one of Particular's best and most important features, which is great. Now, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a bit until I get to this Organic Lines preset. And actually, I'm done with this presets area, so I'm going to click this little chevron again, this little arrow, to close that up. So now we have these organic lines, and we can see all of these different blocks that have been populated by the settings of these organic lines. And we could fiddle with these. So for example, I could go over here to motion, and the velocity here is set to 700. So we have some options, and we could tweak all the motion parameters here. So I might want to take this down to, I don't know, way slower, like 100 or something. And now when this plays back, it has much less velocity. And I actually kind of liked it where it was, so I'm going to put it back up to around 700-ish, but I can tweak it there. Now I'm going to go to the color. Now I could click on this gradient and tweak it, and we'll do that momentarily. But when you click on a block, you also have options, like presets for that block if I go in the upper right-hand corner. So I have options, presets for this particular block. So a bunch of preset gradients in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Neon Noir, and that completely changes the color of our streaks. Look at that. That's pretty awesome. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and play with these colors. I'm going to click on these gradient stops, and I might warm that one up a little bit. Maybe I'll take off the camera tool there. And there we go. We're going to get this like saturated orange color, maybe a saturated pink. I could even click on one of these and like just remove it. Maybe I'll click on purple and make it a little bit more blue, violetish. And there we have like this really cool animated lines. So now I could go ahead and click the apply button, and we can see in just a moment that this applies to our scene. And we have that here in the composition panel. We could see that. And also if we go into our settings in particular, we could see a lot of the same settings that we saw in the designer. So velocity, for example, was set to about 700, 670. And we could adjust that here the same way as we could in the designer. It's just maybe a little easier to see in the designer, which is a little bit more visual. Now, for a lot of users in particular, this might be enough. You might only use the designer and tweak the presets from the designer. But for those of you that would like to learn more, and I highly recommend doing this, please follow along with the rest of the tutorial because I'm going to start from scratch and show you kind of how Particular thinks. So I'm going to go to another scene where I've already applied Particular. Again, this is just the default settings here. These white dots kind of shooting out. And I want to teach you how Particular thinks. So essentially with Particular, you have three different things, three categories, components of Particular. You have an emitter, the thing that shoots out the particles. You have particles themselves, and you also have a bunch of things you can do to tweak and transform the particles. Now that's a gross oversimplification, but when you're learning Particular, this is a good way to think about how things go down. So I'm going to select a particular layer, and I'm going to go up to the emitter, and by default we're emitting a point, just from a single point. And I want to create some snow here. And snow doesn't come from a single point. It comes from a big area. So I'm going to change the emitter type from a point, a single point in space, to a box, to an area. And that's going to be much more like snow. Now, I want to change the size of this because there's some areas over here that don't have any snow on them. And I can go do that with the emitter size XYZ. Now, by default, this is kind of like a cube. X, Y, and Z are linked. So they're all the same size. It's proportional. So I'm going to change XYZ linked to XYZ individual so I could adjust X, Y, and Z independently. So I'm going to adjust X, that's left to right, because I definitely want to cover the screen here with snow. And I'm going to go a little bit above the size of my comp. I'm also going to reduce the emitter size Y because we don't want particles emitting from kind of down the ground here. By default, when you have a box emitter, particles are just kind of emitting from all over the place. So I want to reduce Y, and then I also want to change the direction value because by default it's uniform, meaning that they just kind of bounce around all over the place. But I want to change this direction from uniform to directional because I want them to come from above and then come down. Now, in order for them to come down, they don't look like they're doing much of anything. That doesn't seem like they changed that much. What we need to do in this case is change the X rotation of the box emitter to -90 degrees. And that will make it so it rotates so that the box is directional and it's now pointing downwards. So now what I need to do is adjust the position because it looks like it's kind of coming from like right here. They're coming from on screen and I want it to start off screen. So I want to raise the position value, and there's the effect control point that represents our emitter. So I could just raise that outside the comp boundaries there. And that's looking pretty good. I want to actually adjust the emitter size Y now because now that we've rotated it, Y is the new Z. So Z is what I want to reduce actually here. And then I want to increase size Y because that's going to give us some depth. Again, these axes are kind of switched around a little bit because of the X rotation. So let's increase emitter size Y. And now as we play this back, we can see that we have some particles that look kind of like snow. We're getting there, guys. Now you'll notice that a few seconds in, we have a lot more particles on screen than when we start. Now for some types of animations that might work, but I want there to be snow on screen from frame 1. So what I'm going to do is come down in the emitter section to emission extras, open that up and increase the pre-run value to 100. This will run particles, the particle simulation, and start emitting particles almost like before the current time, before the layer starts. So that way, at the beginning of the layer, we already have particles on screen. Now, we have some other issues here. So I'm going to close up the emitter, and let's talk about the particles themselves. So to borrow again from Mitch Hedberg, we've been talking about the rice cooker. It's now time to start talking about the rice. So I'm going to open up the particle section, and here's where we control the look of the particle. We can control how long it's alive. See the particles here, it's almost like they're like little lives, and they have a birth and they have a lifespan. And then at the end of that lifespan, they vanish, they disappear, or they fade out. They end basically. By default here, our lifespan is only 3 seconds, and we want that to be longer. So I'm going to increase this. And now, since there's a lot less death in our particles, there's a lot more particles on screen here. Now we could change the particle type. For snow, sphere is the perfect choice, but we could choose glow sphere. We can choose star. There are a bunch of options here. You could even choose a custom layer using one of the sprite or textured polygon options. You could choose another layer in your comp to use as a texture for a particle in particular. Again, I'm going to leave this set to sphere. And we might fiddle with the size later, but I can adjust the size random to get a little bit of randomization in the size of my particles. Likewise, we could adjust the opacity random to get some randomization in the opacity of our particles. That just looks so much more organic than it did before. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to unsolo this layer so we can see our background. Okay. Not bad, not bad. The particles are a little big. And actually what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the emitter and adjust the position of these. I'm going to push these back because it doesn't look like there's any particles back here. So I'm going to increase the Z value and push these back. Looking pretty good. And I might go down to my size now and take these down to, let's say 4, maybe even 3. And this is kind of how I work in particular usually. It's kind of a push-pull back and forth type thing where I'll change one thing and then it'll mess up something else. And I kind of keep going back and forth to dial in my settings. I might go in and increase the size Y to space out how many particles there are. I might even add more particles per second. So right now there's 100 particles per second. I might change this to 200 particles per second. Gives us a lot more snow. Let's preview that. And hey, Winter Wonderland, guys. Look at that. That's amazing. Let's preview it in real time. And that's looking great. Now, one of the things I love about this is the way that these particles are falling. They're not uniform. Some of them are kind of drifting off to the left. Some are drifting off to the right. Some are drifting back a little bit. And it creates this really great randomization that adds so much reality to this scene. And one of the things I'm going to do to increase that is play with the physics here. I'm going to close up emitter, close up particle, and we have this physics section. If we wanted these particles to fall more intensely, we could either adjust the velocity here in the emitter section, or we could add some gravity. So as I increase the gravity, then these particles fall faster. I don't want to do that for now. I'm going to take this back to 0. But what I do want to do is open up the air section, and I could actually have a windy force blowing on this. So super easy to set up here. All I have to do is go to wind X, that's along the X axis, left to right, and increase this a little bit. I don't know, maybe 16. See how that looks. Yeah, very subtle, very faint, but these are definitely blowing at kind of an angle now. So we're seeing this really great organic effect with a little bit of wind. We could also keyframe this to create a big gust and then come back down and have it be a little bit more normal. It's just beautiful. And how long did that take us? Like a few seconds or something? I don't know. That was fast. So particular is phenomenal for visual effects, but it's also great for motion design. Here's another example here. If we preview this animation, we've got a little text here, comes on screen. It's elegant because it says it is. And I've gone ahead and applied particular for you here, and I haven't changed any of the default settings other than to adjust the position, to animate the position. So I'm going to solo this layer so we can see what's going on here, but I animated the position of the emitter. So in the emitter section, there is the position of the particle system. Everything else is exactly the same as its default settings. A point, everything else. I just animated that position thing because it's kind of boring just sitting here and watching me like keyframe this stupid thing. So it just moves around, and that's all it does. So what I'm going to do here is unsole this so we could see our comp again. By default, these particles kind of just drift off wherever. And that's because the particles inherit the motion caused by the movement of this position property. So by default, they kind of like move up a little bit when I animated them. And so then these particles just kind of like get shot off into space, and they go off this way, off to the upper left. And I don't want any part of that. I don't believe in that at all. So I'm going to adjust this value, the velocity from motion. And I'm going to take that down a healthy amount, maybe like to 5 or something. And then our particles don't go wandering off so far. They still blossom a little bit, but not as much. Now, again, particle systems emit particles. And so when this animation is done, it's still just hanging out here, spitting out particles. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to right about here before the animation is done. And I'm going to tell it to stop emitting particles. I'm going to set a keyframe for particles per second, go to the next frame, and take this down to 0. So that way the particles that are on screen right here are it, and no more particles are created. Okay, we're getting there. Now, let's play with this. These particles wander off way too much. Autosave, would you? Oh, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and take down velocity. Maybe let's take it down to like 10. Maybe that's a little bit too excessive. Yeah, maybe 15. And because the velocity is toned down, they don't go shooting off because they don't have that much velocity. They stay right there, and it's more elegant. Now, what I'm going to do here is close up emitter for the time being and open up particle. And I think that the life of these particles needs to be a little bit shorter, so I'm going to take this down to 2. We could also adjust the life random, so some particles last a little bit longer and some particles die out a little bit sooner. By default, these spheres have a little bit of feather on them, like a soft edge. I don't think that works here. I want things to be kind of like elegant sparkles, so I'm going to take sphere feather down to 0, which hardens the edge and makes them appear a little bit bigger. So I definitely want to take the size down to maybe like 2, and then maybe bump up the size random so they kind of look like little elegant sparkles there. And actually, this still might be a little bit too big. I'm going to take the size down to 1.5. Oh, and there we go. Guys, I'm starting to like this. I'm going to increase opacity random just a little bit. And let's see what we got. Hey, all right. Not bad. Not bad at all. So you can see here, there's just nice little pepper element, just a little flair here with my motion design. And folks, that's the basics of Particular. And you could see you could do amazing things with just that, but obviously there's so much more to explore. And what I'd like to do in the remaining few seconds here of the tutorial is I'd like to give you some hints at what to study when you're going to learn a little bit more about Particular after this tutorial. I'm going to go to this little comp here of applied Particular. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is auxiliary particles. Auxiliary particles allow you to use every particle in particular as its own particle emitter. It's a little bit of a mind melter, yes, I understand that. But it turns every particle into its own particle system. So as I go into aux system, emit is turned off by default. But if I change this to continuously, that will cause every particle to continuously emit particles. And this is where you can do some really powerful stuff. We saw some smoke trails earlier using this, and we can do 3D shapes and a bunch of amazing things with auxiliary particles. Now, for the next couple things, I'm going to jump back into the designer here. If we go into the presets, I want to close up this here. Light and Magic. I'm going to open up the nature section, click on blowing maple leaves. We see these blowing maple leaves here. And as you can see here, this is a custom particle. This is using another object as a particle. If I click on particle type, this block here in the designer, and I go up to blocks, you can see that Particular ships with tons of amazing presets that you can use as custom particles, and you also can choose your own, of course, but tons of objects and shapes here to play with, which is amazing. Another thing to explore is that now Particular can have multiple systems. In other words, before we have regular particular with, the particles and then auxiliary particles. And now we could have multiple instances of particular with auxiliary particles and everything else inside of one instance of particular. It's, again, a mind number, but I'm going to go into multiple system presets, and you can see some extremely potent and powerful systems here, like this nebula galaxy. I'm going to click this little camera icon and move around this, and we have a full 3D nebula, star field, everything in one instance of particular. It's extremely powerful. Definitely something to check out. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here. And one final thing I want to show you here, you can now emit particles from a 3D OBJ file in particular, even an OBJ sequence. You can do this in the designer, or you can do this here in the interface. I'm going to open up emitter, and there's the emitter type. There's point and box that we talked about. There's sphere, grid, a bunch of options here, but there's also OBJ model. When you do that, there's this choose OBJ button that becomes active. I can click that. I can choose from a list of 3D objects. Again, this will be your particle emitter. So I could choose, light bulb, icosa, or something like that. I can click it, click OK. And now our particles are emitted in this icosa shape. Doesn't seem too much right now, but if I take down the velocity so those particles don't shoot out as much, I'll actually take that down to just like 5. Then you can see that we are actually kind of like building a 3D shape with this OBJ. Here's an example that our own Rabinowitz created using 3D OBJs as particle emitters in particular. Look at how amazing that is. Folks, thanks so much for joining me. I hope that you will check out all the amazing things that Particular has to offer. Happy playing on behalf of Red Giant. I'm Chad Perkins. Take care.